Hello, my name is Jim Downs and I'm a field specialist in forestry for Ohio State University Extension. And today I am back out on my tree farm in Hocking County, Ohio to introduce an important non-native invasive species, Japanese barberry. Japanese barberry was originally brought over to the United States sometime in the 1800s for ornamental reasons. And since that point in time, Japanese barberry has been widely planted across the landscape and has escaped out into many of our natural areas, most importantly, our woodlands. Japanese barberry can be found across the entirety of the state and across most of the northeast part of the United States. To identify Japanese barberry, we're going to be looking for a small woodland plant, a bramble, that is usually somewhere between 3 to maybe up to 6 foot in height. At maturity, these can be much wider than they are tall, as you'll see with the specimen that I have back here behind me. The leaves of Japanese barberry are simple. They're going to be alternately arranged along the stem. It does have a very dense foliage, and the top side of the leaves are somewhat of a normal green color, and then the underside is going to be much of a lighter, more pale color, almost looking a little bit silver. The leaves themselves are very small. They tend to be less than an inch in length. Sometimes they may only be a quarter inch in length. They do have these fairly long petioles, making them look somewhat like a spatula that you might find in the kitchen. The stems themselves tend to run very fine, so they have very thin twigs that are going to be grooved or angled. And along those stems, we will see some very short, straight thorns. Those will be single thorns. They're fairly hard and kind of needle-like. One of the interesting things about this plant is that the cambium layer and actually much of the wood is bright yellow, and that's coming from an alkaloid chemical referred to as berberine. The fruit that is produced by this plant is a small reddish colored berry that typically will ripen sometime in late fall. Oftentimes those fruits do persist on through most of the winter. This tends not to be a highly preferred food source for many wildlife species, although some songbirds will eat those fruits and move them around in the forest, but most of the seeds that end up being produced by Japanese barberry will fall and germinate relatively close to the original parent plant. We will see this plant growing in a wide variety of areas, from rather dry sites down to very moist to wet sites. It can tolerate full sun, and it can actually tolerate very shaded environments, which makes this such an important invasive species. One of the ways in which Japanese barberry can spread is through something we refer to as layering. So in areas where the branches of Japanese barberry reaches the forest floor, it does have the ability to grow a root down into the ground and vegetatively spread in that means. There is a positive correlation, or actually a negative correlation from the point of view of people, between the relationship of Japanese barberry and some of our woodland ticks, especially that of the black-legged tick, which is a well-known vector of Lyme disease. And that is primarily for two different reasons. The Japanese barberry makes an excellent questing site for ticks. So essentially, barberry makes an ideal place for ticks to look for its prey. So essentially what they do is they will sit out on the branch tips of barberry with a couple of their legs extended, waiting for a mammal to pass by. The way they can hop on and get that blood meal that they are searching for. One of the things that we will see in our woodlands that contain Japanese barberry is that those black-legged ticks will retain a higher likelihood of carrying Lyme disease to both other mammals and as well to people. And the reason for that is Japanese barberry makes an ideal location for white-footed mice, which is one of the mammals that the black-legged tick can complete its life cycle on, especially in the nymph and larval stages. And they can pick up the Lyme disease from those smaller mammals and spread it to other ticks. But then importantly, if they pick up that Lyme disease from that small mammal, they can carry that on to humans. With Japanese barberry, they do tend to form these very dense thickets, And so underneath the Japanese barberry plants, as you can see here, there tends to be very few other plants growing underneath the Japanese barberry. Occasionally you will see a bunch of little small Japanese barberry growing underneath of other Japanese barberry. So for woodland owners that have this plant growing in their woodlands, probably one of the easiest ways of controlling this species is through the use of a foliar herbicide that can be applied appropriately anytime during the growing season when the leaves are completely grown and while the leaves remain green during the growing season. The pulling of Japanese barberry is also possible as a control method when you have individual stems or small clumps of Japanese barberry. As the plants extend in size, they often have a very large and fairly deep root system. They have a very fibrous root system, and it can be very difficult to get the entirety of the root system out of the ground, which is why most of the time it is recommended when you're dealing with larger infestations of Japanese barberry to apply some type of foliar application during the growing season. There are a variety of different types of Japanese barberry that are used in landscaping situations. Some of these will have very purplish or golden colored foliage. It is unclear how invasive some of those barberry species will end up being. However, my standard recommendation to folks is to plant native species and not non-native species, because we know how those native species are going to behave in our ecosystems. And we have plenty of examples of non-native invasives like this Japanese barberry that misbehave in our forest areas and our natural areas, causing some very severe issues across the landscape. And with that, thank you for watching and have a great day.